On this episode of Win Over Depression, we're talking about how God can take the places where you have hurt the most and use them to produce strength, wisdom, compassion, purpose, and a testimony that reaches someone else. There are some experiences in life that change you forever. Some pain goes so deep that while you are living through it, you cannot imagine anything meaningful ever coming out of it. You may feel brokenhearted, disappointed, exhausted, confused, or even angry with God. You may ask, why did I have to? God always told me that my greatest testimony would come from my... I am your host, Tamara Trotter, depression overcomer, author, social work expert, proud Delta, loving daughter and sister, aunt to 8 and great aunt to 3. This podcast is your safe place for healing, growth, and real transformation. In this space, we explore faith, learning how to trust God even when we feel uncertain and overwhelmed. We also confront stress, understanding how it impacts your mind, body, and spirit, and how to manage it in a healthy, sustainable way. We navigate loneliness, processing the quiet moments where you may feel unseen or disconnected, and we unpack anxiety, exploring what it feels like to battle internally while still showing up externally. I am overjoyed that you are here to gain insight and inspiration from someone who has lived with chronic depression for most of their adult life. By His grace, I became well enough to pour. Let's dive into today's episode, but before we do, let me tell you about my course, The 14 Days to Manage. If you're ready to pick you first and better understand your mental illness and how to decrease your episodes of sadness, guilt, or worry, The 14 Days to Manage Depression will equip you with the tools I used to move from being chronically depressed to now experiencing few symptoms of depression. Let me help you get to that place of mental health. Instead of trying to figure everything out on your own, this course walks you through daily steps that help you slow down your thoughts, process your emotions, and begin to regain control in a healthy, manageable way. When stress feels constant and worry won't quiet down, having a guided plan helps you move from confusion to clarity. What makes this course especially powerful is that it just doesn't talk about healing. It gives you practical tools to apply in real time. Through guided activities, affirmations, and intentional reflection, you'll learn how to interrupt your negative thought patterns, build healthier habits, and respond to stress in a way that supports your mental and emotional well-being. It helps you shift from reacting to stress and worry to actually managing them. Most importantly, this course is rooted in faith. It helps you strengthen your connection with God while learning how to release what you cannot carry. So let's talk about the foundational scripture for this episode. Revelation 12, verse 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. There is power in your testimony. There is power in telling somebody, I know what that kind of pain feels like. There's power in saying, I've been in a dark place too. But darkness does not have the final word. And there is incredible power in being able to say, what I went through did not destroy me. God used it to develop me. So today we are talking about what happens when our deepest pain becomes our greatest testimony, why we should never be ashamed of the chapters that hurt us, and how God can use the very experience we wished we could erase to give somebody else hope. Because sometimes your greatest ministry comes from the place where you received your deepest wound. Sometimes your greatest wisdom comes from your hardest lesson. Sometimes your greatest strength is born in the season when you felt the weakest. And sometimes your greatest testimony begins with the words, "You have no idea what I had to go through to get here." So be reminded that a chapter is not our life. Whatever the pain, whatever the battle, giving up is never an option. So it's time to snuggle in your favorite chair, make that cup of tea, and get ready for today's episode. Grab a pen and a paper if you like to. There's some good stuff coming your way. So my friends, we may not know where the journey will end, but when your heart is surrendered to God, you can trust Him enough to follow where He is leading you. You don't have to know the outcome. Keep your heart connected to God, follow His direction, trust Him through what you cannot see. And I know that that's the hardest part, but it's important to believe that God is running interference and He is in the background working things out for our good, even when we can't see it. There are going to be times in your life when we simply don't know how things are going to turn out. God does some of His most intimate work in places where our hearts have been broken. And your testimony is not always that God prevented the pain. Sometimes your testimony is, I went through it and God stayed with me. I cried, but I kept going. I questioned, but I kept believing. I became tired, but I didn't give up. I experienced pain I never imagined I would endure, but somehow God gave me enough grace for one more day, and then another and another, until eventually I looked back and realized I made it through. God's grace is sufficient. And I want to stay right here for a few more minutes because somebody listening to me today may be still in the middle of the pain. You may not be able to call it a testimony yet. You may not be on the other side. You may still be trying to understand what happened. You may still be grieving what you lost. You may still be asking God questions that have not been answered. And I want you to know something important. Your testimony does not begin when your pain ends. Your testimony begins the moment you decide that the pain will not have the final word. Again, your testimony does not begin when the pain ends. Your testimony begins the moment you decide the pain will not have the final word. Sometimes we think a testimony has to be neat. We think we have to be completely healed, restored, completely over it, and able to explain exactly why everything happened. But we all know that life doesn't work that way. Sometimes your testimony sounds like, I'm still healing, but I'm still here. I still have difficult days, but I'm stronger than I used to be. I still don't understand everything, but I trust God even more than I ever did before. I still cry sometimes, but those tears don't mean I've lost my faith. They mean I'm human. That is a testimony too, because healing is not always the absence of pain. Sometimes healing is discovering that pain no longer controls you. There was a time when thinking about what happened may have taken you completely under. Now you can think about it and breathe. There was a time when you couldn't even talk about it. Now you can tell your story. There was a time when you thought your life was over, but now you are beginning to see that there are still chapters left to live, and that is progress. Progress is always what we're looking for. That is healing, and that is God working in the background. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8 through 9. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. You may have been knocked down, but you were not destroyed. You may have been disappointed, but you were not destroyed. You may have been rejected, betrayed, abandoned, overlooked, misunderstood, or wounded, but you were not destroyed. And sometimes that alone is the testimony, because you are much stronger than you give yourself credit for, and you are stronger than you ever thought possible. It is during these times that you realize just how strong you are and how deep is your resilience. So don't abandon the journey because today's chapter is difficult. You haven't read the whole story yet. Sometimes we try to judge the entire book by the chapter we're currently in, but God isn't finished writing. And at the time, you didn't know that you survived something that you thought you couldn't survive. You know, one of the things pain can do is convince you that something has been taken from you permanently. Your joy, your confidence, your sense of safety, your ability to trust, your dreams and your hopes. But God knows how to restore things pain tried to steal. And restoration does not always mean God gives you back exactly what you had before. Sometimes restoration means He gives you something different and deeper. Maybe you get the older version of yourself back. Maybe God develops a stronger version of who you are and gives you the ability and the discernment to figure things out, to be clearer, to understand what your next best step should be, and to have the confidence that you are in fact making the right decision. So remember, this new you is a wiser version, a more discerning version, a version of you that understands boundaries, a version of you that knows your worth, a version of you that no longer needs everybody's approval, a version of you that knows how to pray when life gets difficult, a version of you that understands what it means to depend on God when there's nobody else to call. But here's the good news. Even when God did not cause the pain, He can still use it. He can take the pieces. He can take the disappointment. He can take the years you thought were wasted. And He can take the tears that nobody saw, the nights that you wondered whether you would ever feel yourself again. And somehow God can turn those things into compassion, wisdom, purpose, strength, and ministry. Think about how differently you speak to someone once you have actually lived through something. You don't just say, I understand. You really understand. When you have experienced grief, you know that sometimes the grieving person does not need a speech. They just need someone to sit beside them. When you have battled depression, you don't need someone to tell you to just brush it off, because you know that it just does not work like that. When you have experienced disappointment, you know what it feels like when a dream does not happen the way you expected. When you have to rebuild, you have to know how much courage it takes to begin again. And that is why your story matters. There is somebody who will hear your story differently because you did not learn everything you know from a book. You lived it. You know what it's like to feel afraid. You know what it's like to feel unsure. You know what it's like to feel like you're never going to get out of this struggle. And you know what it's like when it feels like nobody understands, nobody's helping you. But that gives your testimony power, because people don't always need somebody who has never struggled. Sometimes they need somebody who can look them in the eye and say, I've been there. I know what darkness feels like. I know what it's like to have questions. I know what it's like to cry myself to sleep at night. And sometimes the reason God allows you to remember what you came through is not so you can live in the past. It is to recognize how far He has brought you. There are things that once brought you to where you are now. And you got on your knees to pray, and now you have the strength to talk about it. And if God is still writing, that means the ending has not been decided by your worst moment. Isaiah 61, verse 3. Beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Think about that. Beauty for ashes. Ashes represent something that has already burned, something that has already happened and already been lost. And yet God gives us the ashes. Give me what is left. Give me what you thought was ruined. Give me the part of the story you don't know what to do with, and watch what I can make from it. Beauty to ashes. It's amazing. Maybe you cannot change what happened, but you can decide on what happens next. You can decide the pain will make you compassionate instead of bitter. You can decide the disappointment will make you wiser instead of hopeless. And you can decide that what tried to silence you will become the reason you use your voice. You can decide that what nearly broke you will become the very thing that you help somebody else stand. And this is when pain begins to become purpose, when wounds become wisdom, and when survival becomes testimony. Healing is not a competition. Keep praying, keep getting the help you need, keep taking care of yourself, and keep believing that this season does not get the final word. One day you may tell your story and realize that the part you once wanted to hide is the part that touches somebody the most, because somebody else will hear you think, if God brought her through that, maybe He can bring me through it. The pain hurt, but it didn't win. Depression came, but it didn't win. The heartbreak came, the disappointment came, the storm came, but none of it was able to overcome or disappoint what you already had established, because you are strong. So keep believing, keep moving forward, knowing that God will continue to carry you. He will continue to make sure that you get through it. Keep the faith, and always know that when God is for you, who can be against you? And no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Before I end today's episode, I want to invite you to join my Facebook community called the Win Over Depression Community. If you join and you drop your email, you will also receive the newsletter for Win Over Depression that comes out every single month. Remember, join the Facebook community Win Over Depression today. See you there. Before we go, I just want to remind you about the 14 days to manage depression. You can find it in the show notes. There should be a link there, and you will be well on your way. Invest in yourself today. The 14 days to manage depression will help you get to the place where you deserve to be. Don't delay. Get it today. Would you also do me another favor? Could you take 60 seconds and leave a review on Apple Podcasts? I would greatly appreciate it.